Hello, and welcome to our panel event on gender identity and intersectionality. This session's been jointly organised by NHS Wales Virtual Pride and Pride Cymru, and questions for our panel have been supplied by both NHS Wales staff and through Pride Cymru social media posts. And in some cases, similar questions have been combined together. A huge thanks to both the organisers of the panel, to the panel members themselves, and to everyone who supplied questions for this discussion. Currently in the UK, when we're born, parents must register births within a few weeks, supplying information about date and place of birth, who the parents are, and the sex of the child. Sometimes a registrar might ask to see the Red Book of Health information to confirm some of those details that are supplied by parents, but sometimes not. Typically, parents report the sex based on an observation of genital characteristics and a series of assumptions that other sex characteristics, hormones, gonads, chromosomes, gender, and so on, are aligned in a typical binary way. For most people, this assigned sex is broadly congruent with their experience of their gender. These people are said to be cisgender or cis for short. For some people, their experience of gender is not congruent with typical understandings of maleness or femaleness. They can be described as non-binary. For those whose parents reported a sex that isn't congruent with a person's gender, they're said to be trans or transgender. Today, we're exploring about how being trans or non-binary is one element that makes up who we are, informs but doesn't completely define our experiences of the world. My name's Kate Rose. I'm a woman. I'm middle class but grew up in poverty. I live as a white person. I'm trans, have no visible impairments, and I'm co-chair of the Welsh Government's LGBTI staff network PRISM. Can I ask the panel to introduce themselves? And looking on my screen, I shall simply go round in the order that I can see on my screen. Selina, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name's Selina. I am, let's see if I get this right, gender non-binary. And I'm black, I've got short curly hair. This is my sign name. And I'm currently wearing some peach coloured glasses and a t-shirt that says alt mask with a unicorn on it. I work for an organisation called Aubergine, which is a Black and LGBT run organisation, which is also run by autistic people. All of our staff are autistic. And our plan is to provide activities and safe places for people who are LGBTQ to socialise, which isn't revolving around alcohol.
Thank you, Selina. Shash, could I ask you to introduce yourselves?
My name is Shash. My pronouns are she, her. I am a trans woman. I work with Glitter Cymru. I'm also part of the South Wales Trans and Non-Binary Mutual Aid Group. I also help with a bunch of social groups, moderating and such kind of thing. And and I do speaking engagements and panels to educate people on things like intersectionality.
Thank you. Stephen, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Stephen. I'm based up in Aberystwyth. We started a group called Transgender Mid Wales a few years ago between myself and Kate. It is just supporting people in rural setting with reaching out and providing support as and when needed. And we meet once a month for breakfast, if we can. Obviously, at the moment, we can't. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Alistair.
Hi, I'm Alistair. I'm a trans man and I live in Pembrokeshire. I work for Hywel Health Board and I'm chair of the LGBTQ staff network within the Health Board. I'm also in private practice, a therapist specialising in gender, sexuality, relationship, and diversity therapy.
Thank you. And Kate.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Kate Hutchinson. Wear many hats, to be honest. I'm probably here in my capacity as trans outreach officer for Pride Cymru. I also work for Diversity Role Models, the LGBT plus education charity. Also on the National Committee for Schools Out UK, another LGBT education charity.
And finally, we're joined by Liz, who's our BSL sign interpreter. And the questions have all been supplied from NHS staff and from Pride Cymru posts. The first question we have, I think it's quite an important question because this is a panel on intersectionality and gender identity. So intersectionality and privilege can be a hard concept to grasp. How would the panel describe what it means? Shash, could I ask you to what is intersectionality and privilege? How would you explain that to people?
Oh, okay, big one. Essentially, intersectionality is the understanding that different aspects of one's identity can compound in different experiences, essentially, especially in a system that, so for example, intersectionality came about essentially because I believe it was an employer that was firing Black women. And technically, under the law in America, that it couldn't be classed as sexism because they weren't firing white women, they weren't firing other women, but it couldn't be classed as racism because they weren't firing Black men. And essentially, it's in this particular kind of thing, it's called misogynoir, and that's specifically sexism aimed at Black women. Yes, Selena?
I think Liz might need a spelling of misogynoir.
If anyone could, is there a chat?
MISOGINOIS. So it's misogyny and racism together, and it's particularly directed at Black women.
And
sorry.
And then so essentially that's essentially how intersectionality was kind of as a concept was born, in a sense. It's essentially showing that different forms of prejudice and discrimination can affect people with different aspects of their identity, and it's something to always kind of consider when developing any kind of system. And it's very important to realize that it's not just intersectionality itself is not a bolt-on. You can't attach it to something as a afterthought. You have to use it from the ground up. Essentially, it's reconstitutive. So if you're not and this is how things like people get left out in the wayside. Essentially, like because of, I suspect, in particular to this discussion, trans people, when people think of systems, they only think of cis people while constructing said system. So things like, for example, cervical screening or mammograms or things like that, which it's usually advocated as cis women, need to be thought of in a way while if intersectionality was used while those systems was constructed and analyzed through an intersectional lens, we wouldn't be having this discussion of why trans men and trans women need those things, and non-binary people need those things because of and it provides a way to analyze instances and issues that can and it provides essentially a word to help grasp that concept. If that makes sense.
I think that's really helpful. Has anyone got perhaps anything else to add in terms of that that sense of it being a framework of understanding? Or has anyone got some perhaps some practical examples of outside of the context that Shash has identified there? Selena?
Shall I give an example as someone who is from the Black community but is also autistic? So, as we know, being a BAME, particularly Black, can kind of with the systemic racism that goes on, sometimes we experience violence at a higher rate. Not so much myself. I'm lighter skinned, so I don't have the same experiences as my brothers. But if, for example, police are more likely to approach a Black person with caution, imagine that Black person is autistic and has unusual behaviours. For example, me, I might be stimming, might be flapping my arms around. When somebody who is Black is seen as suspicious or seen as different, quite often they're seen as suspicious rather than necessarily just seen straight away as just being a bit quirky or odd. So that's something that I've kind of experienced. And that's something that, like, as an autistic person, you wouldn't experience it the same. As a Black person, you wouldn't necessarily experience it the same. But as an autistic Black person, it's a compounded issue. We're kind of like more likely to seen as having a mental health issue, more likely to be seen as being potentially dangerous, those kinds of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in terms of being trans, you often find that trans people are often reduced down to a single kind of stereotype. Has anyone experienced, has anyone got a good example of where that stereotype of what a trans person is has run up against, and they've just had that moment where this just does not describe my experience? I'm looking at Alistair or Stephen. Have you got anything perhaps to add have you got perhaps an example of where that may have happened to you?
I think for me is transitioning into male was very much all of a sudden everyone would perceive me to have no emotions, just completely cut off. Yes, men cry and people find that quite strange. And being a trans man, being slightly on the camp side of being a trans man, everyone thinks, oh, I should be big, butch and muscular, which I'm not either, but I am what I am.
Yeah, that's been an experience from my perspective as well, not just in the general public, but actually even in accessing trans services in the GIC, where I was challenged that I was not male enough because at the time I had long hair. And in order to get a sign-off for top surgery, I had to cut my hair. So it's about people's perceptions of how male are you, and whether you fit their boxes of what it means to be male or what it means to be female.
Kate,
so in a sense, it's health professionals in this situation determining what gender looks like,
Yeah.
using those stereotypes and forcing trans people into those stereotypes in order for them to progress.
Kate, you work as a trainer, sort of. I presume you'll sort of have to talk about intersectionality and explain that to audiences. How would you describe intersectionality to people? To
be honest, the two sort of threads of what we're talking about there, just the way they intersect at the moment. And thinking about stereotypes. Stereotypes, our society is so influenced by stereotypes and societal expectation, which are all based on stereotypes. Society as a whole is quite unaware of intersectionality as a whole. You know, I'm just trying to think of particular things. So, yeah, Alistair there saying about expectations. So I knew early on in my transition, definitely all these clinical expectations of, you thought that you were expected to turn up at the gender clinic dressed in or presenting in a certain way, which, to be honest, as time goes on, those expectations and those attitudes within the system are changing. But it's still rife, and it's still something we're fighting. It's heteronormativity, cisnormativity, every day, all day, 24/7.
I think Stephen, Alistair, and Kate, you've picked up on a theme that actually the next question that I think it's fair to say has been asked by one of our health professionals. They're asked, do you have any examples of a time when you didn't feel respected, accepted, safe when accessing or engaging in healthcare? And I think I've often heard that question expressed in terms of accessing gender identity services. But are there other times that people have had their transness intersecting with other parts of their identity in terms of accessing healthcare? So, Selena, is that something that you've encountered?
I'm gonna pass this one over to, I think that other people got a lot more that they can. Other people on the panel have got a lot more that they can offer on the topic of accessing healthcare than I can at the moment.
Okay, who'd like to go first then? So, Kate, you have your hand up.
One thing a lot of folks in the trans community face when they're accessing healthcare, and I'm talking non-trans specific healthcare, is that quite often when we go into a healthcare situation for support, sometimes clinicians, whoever you're speaking to, make it about your transness. There's this term that's been used in the past called trans broken arm. It's about you use whatever service because you've, I don't know, hurt your finger, broke your finger, or you might have, you might be suffering with depression and you want some support around that. So you go to try and find that support, but then it gets shifted to making it about your gender identity. So yeah, I suffer with depression, but my depression isn't always anything to do with my gender identity. It's to do with a lot of different things in my life. But quite often you will find that it gets pulled towards that area, and that makes you reluctant sometimes to engage with health services on that level. There are other things as well, like administrative things. So I remember early on, I was getting letters for a while that were still addressed to Mr. Kate Hutchinson for a hospital appointment. So you see that, you start thinking in your head, I'm going to sit in a waiting room and they're going to call that name out like that. So we need our confidence building, I think, a lot about healthcare engagement.
Yeah.
Josh?
I think one of the issues, especially in like when trans people access healthcare, so obviously when you're accessing healthcare as a patient or a healthcare professional, there's an immediate, the immediate assumption is the power is with the person who's treating you, essentially, the health. And so for trans people, that becomes another issue of, we go into a scenario where we tend to be more educated about trans stuff than the clinician themselves. And then in that instance, it causes a conflict, because the minute we start to try and correct the health clinician on anything, it goes one of two ways. One, which is, I hope that most would, they take it in their stride and change and listen, and then the power imbalance changes. But also, trans people shouldn't have to educate people in the first place. But the other, which is surprisingly also quite common, is unsurprising, I guess, is that they take affront to it, that you're questioning their authority in any way. And this is the essential issue here, and this is why we call it gatekeeping a lot of the time. And this isn't just about trans-related healthcare, and this is all types of healthcare, as Kate mentioned, and it could be from mental health or even getting like and especially when disabled trans people experience this a lot, because, for example, if you're autistic, I have had autistic friends who've been told their transness is an issue of their autism, or similarly, like I've had people have it for BPD. I've had, I think that for me, it's been said that it was my PTSD that caused my transness at points, and these are all from professionals who have said this, which is unfortunately infuriating. But as a trans person in that scenario, in that instance, what can that trans person do? And the answer is not much at all, because at the end of the day, that healthcare professional is holding everything. It holds all the power to essentially bettering yourself, because you're there as a patient. You're there because something's wrong, and you can't go and fix that without going through this person. Hence the gate. And one of the primary issues is, and it's partially how like we put doctors on a pedestal almost at some points, and the issues of ego and stuff like that. And it's frustrating because we're not there to have a confrontation. We're there to get we're there to get some care, and the minute that this conflict happens, trust is lost. And if you ask any health clinician, they tell you trust with your patient is the most important thing, because if they don't have your trust, well, it makes it infinitely hard to treat someone, because they are not going to willingly give information to you which you might need to treat them, because at the end of the day, there's only so much a health practitioner can glean from looking at you and your record, because they need to talk to you. They need to be able to communicate with you in some way that allows them to make a diagnosis or treat you. And if you lose that trust, and this happens to so many trans people. For example, my mutual aid group, we run a map of trans-friendly GPs, because we have acknowledged that it's an issue, and at the moment trans people still need to access care. This isn't necessary, and like, sure, we could fight in the system to try and push more GPs to be and complain about every individual, but that's emotional labor involved and time we don't have. And then on top of that, like, people need care now. That takes time. We need trans people to get their care now. And so having the fact that this kind of map exists, or like anything like that where we have to find trans-friendly institutions, I guess, is a shocking indictment of how rampant transphobia is within society.
The green book, if you like.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. It's a term we use, but obviously it's prevalent back in... for those who don't know, Green Book was a book of businesses businesses and institutions that were considered friendly to Black people in the South in America, and was handed out essentially around the communities.
When people were traveling and on the road, they knew safe places that they could stay or stop to eat and so on.
Don't watch the film, though. That's
no.
Don't do that.
I'm quite interested in this notion of finding, of struggling to find those good experiences. And I think the question's framed, I felt the question was framed in a slightly negative way. What are the bad examples? So could anyone perhaps talk about what difference good healthcare has made for them? Stephen? And then Alistair.
I started my journey in 2015 with transitioning, and from start to finish, it was done within 2 years. And I consider myself extremely, extremely lucky. I had hormones from the GP from the word go. I had top surgery within 18 months of my referrals. I can't complain. The service I've had from our local clinicians and local hospital has been exceptional. I work within the same hospital now. The staff have accepted who I am. No eyebrows raised, nothing. I've continued my life as I should. And that's how it should be. And that's what I would like every individual going through the system to experience, hopefully.
Alistair.
I'm impressed. I'm started my journey in 2013, and I only last year got signed off for top surgery, which hasn't happened yet. So it's taken me 6 years so far, and I'm still going. However, my experience of healthcare has been particularly good, other than experiences in navigating the GIC. I think within our own health board, we're both in the same health board, where we have a particularly good set of endocrinologists and GPs, etc., that are really, really good at supporting trans people. I haven't had any negative experiences in that sense. But in the work that I do within the health board, what the most important thing that I think I've started to do in the last 2 years since we started up the staff network again, is we start looking at policy. So there are various policies within the NHS, clinical policies, where I get copied into reviewing those policies and looking at them through a trans lens or through an LGBT lens. And there are quite a number of cases where I've sort of said, why are we gendering the person at this stage in the pathway? Is it necessary? Is it necessary for the clinical decision to have a gender or a biological sex at that point in time? And quite often it comes back with, actually, no, it's not. It doesn't make any difference to the care that the person receives, and therefore we don't need to gender. So it's actually about challenging those standards that have been in place historically, and changing how we look at how we set up our own systems within the NHS. And that's actually been a really positive part of my journey on the last 2 years, is being able to make those changes. But I recognise that I'm only doing that in our own health board, and it needs to be a wider discussion so that health services do this as a matter of course.
Thank you. That's really interesting to see how, I suppose, in some sense, you've been, criticising the gendering that's happening within that context, and how having that trans perspective on that has delivered sort of perhaps wider benefits. I think that's quite interesting. So moving on to our third question, which is quite an interesting question. So the question is what does pride mean to you? Is it still relevant? And why do we need to keep celebrating it? So I think there's a lot of, when I saw this question, I thought, well, do we need to keep celebrating it? Is it a celebration? Is everyone included? Is this something, is there, is everyone in our community part of this kind of thing? I was wondering if anyone would like to answer that question. What does pride mean to you, Shash?
I think pride means to me, it's a protest. It's always going to be a protest to me. And I think, and like I haven't, like I'm still young, and even then for me it's, and to be honest, like most pride events I've seen have been kind of like a party kind of thing, and kind of inaccessible, and it's sad. It's kind of sad that that's what it's become. I find pride's always going to be a protest, purely because, like, for me, it's one of the places that it should be safe and surrounded by people who are standing in solidarity with each other, and protecting each other on through community strength, if that makes sense. And it started as a protest, and it should stay a protest. It should be, and it should be against the system, I guess, if that makes sense. A system, CIS system, as it were. And it more than ever, I think it should be free of anyone that is who oppress the community. And we should be, for example, I don't feel included as a brown person. I know a lot of disabled people at the moment feel excluded and from Pride and most Pride events, and unfortunately Pride Cymru too, and it's because that intersectional lens isn't being applied, if that makes sense. And that comes back to the point, it's like, because at the end of the day, it's become something that it was never meant to be. It's become a celebration for people who have achieved all their goals they want. Like, for like cis white gays, you know, I'm not gonna lie, you guys don't have it as tough as some trans people, and like it shows, because you guys are like, oh, let's have a party, let's you know. And it's infuriating because like we've raised these concerns and people have created alternative events because of how excluded they feel. Like the fact that we have straight people in the march, for example, like straight cis straight people who aren't part of the community, who don't identify with any part of the LGBTQ thing. And it's frustrating. Like, we have corporate companies who may say that they're LGBT friendly, but will still have instances of transphobia. Like, it doesn't make sense for something like, I don't know, Boeing or like Airbus or anything like that, who have like actively hurt like Airbus, for example, who do weapons and stuff like that, and decide, oh, it's fine because they don't bomb us in the UK, I guess. Is that okay? I guess, you know, like, because they don't shoot British kids, we should allow them in the parade. That's what I mean. Like, it's frustrating. This is what I mean. Like, we are allowing anyone who happens to like marginally support LGBT rights within the UK or whatever, who have done it for either image or because it's in the now or whatever, to be part of Pride when they should not be. You don't get to be part of Pride if you do the bare minimum. You need to go, and I don't even think they're doing the bare minimum. You need to go above and beyond. Allies, being an ally isn't a label that you just achieve and then you get a certificate and that's it. It's a constant thing you have to do. When the fact that we have cops at Pride is beyond baffling to me, and then the fact that Pride Cymru have continued to defend having cops at Pride, it's like the response was just sickening, because we've raised these concerns and then we got a response saying, oh, well, there's LGBT cops. And it's like, well, they chose to be cops at the end of the day. We didn't choose to be LGBT. And the institution of police, no matter how many good cops there are, is going to it's going to be homophobic, transphobic, etc., and racist. It's just, you can't say just because there's a good few people that they should be at Pride as the whole institution because you've chosen to take part in an oppressive system. You've chosen to be part. So if you are proud of being part of, like, let's say, if you're proud representing military as an institution, for example, or the police as an institution, or companies which build weapons and kill minority groups in other countries and stuff like that. And if you're proud to wear that and like as a badge of pride and say you're LGBT, it's sickening, because we don't want that. Like, the community who are most affected by that kind of thing, do not want that kind of, like, how is it inclusive when you bring in people who actively exclude people by their oppressive natures? Like, they harm Black people, they harm trans people. We've had so many instances of police misgendering, beating up trans folk in prison, violation after violation, and the frustrating thing is, if this happened to any LGBT organization, like say just for the sake of hypothetical, say if something terrible, like something tragic, there's like like an Epstein-like person that happened to exist in an LGBT, that LGBT organization would be finished. Yet we have a police that we continually try to continually forgive, who have continually had people who have committed sexual assault, broken the law, and abused power, and we still respect them as an institution. Why do they deserve that respect? It's beyond baffling, because they don't deserve that. And it's like, it's frustrating, because Pride started at the very beginning. It started against police brutality. You know, the fact that we have Pride today started because police were harassing LGBTQ people. And the fact that we've gotten to the point where we're complacent enough that we allow cops in, basically makes it that makes it feel like that people who are demonized by these police are not part of the community anymore. Like, I don't feel welcome. I know a lot of Black and non-Black people of color who don't feel welcome at Pride. And for me especially, I feel already disenfranchised in my South Asian community because of homophobia and transphobia. And then for one of the biggest LGBTQ organizations in Wales to have police present, I feel unwelcome there too, because in Wales, South Asian people get stopped 2 times more. Black people get stopped 4 times more by the police than a white person. And it's just, I just don't understand how we can say that, like, how Pride Cymru could especially say that, yes, it's cops, because there's LGBT cops, we have to allow them. We don't, it's infuriating, and it deeply saddens me. It deeply does, because Pride should be, especially for the people who are feeling like they're trapped in wherever they are, it should be a place for where they could come and feel safe and feel like they aren't under attack.
Thank you very much for that. That was a really, really passionate, case that you're putting there, and it was really clear from what you were saying there that your experience of Pride is not just. You cannot understand your experience of Pride through just looking at things as, oh, it's all LGBT, or it's all LGBTQ. The other parts of ourselves really inform how we experience these things, and that was really passionate.
I can't choose to be not brown. You know, I can't choose to be white. Cops can choose to be cops at the end of the day. You know, so if they want to be at Pride and they're LGBT, they cannot be a cop for that day. And that's it.
That's really excellent. Thank you very much. Alistair, you're involved in organising sort of the Pride events within your network. I mean, what does Pride mean to you? What is it that you're looking for as part of that work?
I think a lot of what Shash said really resonated with what I feel about Pride, not from my own personal perspective, but from the community perspective, that our identities are intersectional, and you cannot you cannot choose those. They are who we are. And for me, Pride will always be a protest because we do not have equal rights within our community. And I do get frustrated when we are setting up Pride events, and from within the NHS, we want them to be a celebration. And I agree, we should celebrate that we have come a long way in as far as gay rights are concerned, as far as equal marriage is concerned, all of those rights, those historical rights, we have won for sections of our community, but not for everybody in our community. And I try very hard not to just make it feel good, happy events. I try to ensure that we have some education in there, which is actually where this panel came from, was talking in the NHS Virtual Pride All Wales group. And I said, I want some education in there. We're running events throughout Pride Week in the NHS. And yes, it's great to have tea parties. It's great to have film nights and all of those things, which are feel-good things and which help to give us visibility within the organisation. But actually, we still need to be protesting, we still need to be educating, and we still need to be saying, we are not equal. There is not equality so far for huge sections of our population. And I think when you start having those conversations with heteronormative cis people in our organisations, and they realise that they have rights that you don't have, that actually sends it home to them, and they realise why, for us, Pride is still a passionate, as Shash just showed us how passionate she is about that. It just, it gives them a perspective that they hadn't considered before. So yeah, for me, Pride will always still be a protest.
Okay, Kay, I'm going to come to you. A little bit of a difficult one. Obviously, you're in that. You obviously work for Pride Cymru, so it's you're obviously constrained there. But tell what is Pride there? What is Pride for you?
Right. Okay. No problem. Yeah, Pride has its roots in that protest. Pride should be a protest. It should always be a protest. There are now, I think I heard a figure recently. It was about 170, 180 Pride organisations across the UK. And you know what? Pride always needs to work on getting it right and moving itself forward and trying to get it right. And there's things that a lot of prides don't do right. That goes without saying, But it's got to be an effort to make sure and continually try and move that forward, to have those conversations with the community and find out things like this, find out the things that are important to the community. Pride for me, the reason I started working on, I work with a number of prides, and the reason I do that is I'm an educator sort of in my field and what I do as a job. So besides that event, that whichever pride will do every single year, which, it doesn't always represent all of the communities that it should be doing there. And that's something, prides need to work on constantly. But for myself, I worked, a thing I'm passionate about that I try to do through Pride is, educate on a wider scale past that event, part of that organisation as well. So, providing training, providing support, doing what we can to build that. So personally, for what Pride means to me, I try and do as much as I personally can to move that forward. And prides always need to be prepared to listen to the community and move it forward. Because otherwise, if they're not doing that, then, we're not succeeding at what we're trying to do. But we should always be open to, trying to move it forward, trying to have those conversations and adapt to what the community needs, to how the community feels they need to be represented.
And sometimes that can be uncomfortable.
Absolutely, yeah.
Shash,
I think
come back.
Yeah, I think Kate's response was very diplomatic. The thing is, Pride hasn't listened. We know this because I and the Pride group, I'm part of the mutual aid group, and others have written an open letter discussed to Pride Cymru, discussing these very issues that I briefly mentioned, there with detailed specific events that happened at Pride. And after about a week or so, we got a very dismissive response from the chair of Pride Cymru, essentially saying that they won't do anything. And to be honest, the bare minimum we were asking for was don't let cops march in the parade. And I felt like that was a very achievable goal. It was the bare minimum. I wasn't even saying don't use them as security or like not have a stall or anything like that. Just the bare minimum of not letting them march in the parade because they don't deserve to celebrate or protest with us because they are the exact institution we are protesting against. And instead, the response we got was, oh, but they're LGBT cops, and we have to be inclusive of them. And it's such a twisting of the word inclusion, because by including LGBT cops, or cops in general, you are excluding people who have unchangeable, immutable parts of our identity, who are actively oppressed by cops, who are LGBT. Me, Selena, others we cannot change aspects of who we are to appease police. It can never happen. Like, me and Selena could bleach our skin for as much as we can, but we will still be seen as black and brown, you know? Cops can take off their uniform just for a day. Or, I mean, I'd rather they would quit, but that's apparently, like, I'm not asking for much from Pride Cymru. And it's disappointing because we are reaching out. We are continually reaching out. And the reason we want Pride Cymru to change is because they have such a platform. And the reason I still agree to do this panel is because of this platform. Because at the end of the day, they don't realize, or they do, and they're wielding wield such power, such influence, that it's disappointing because it's not actually empowering the whole community. The people it should be empowering, the most marginalized, the intersections in our community that struggle and suffer the most under a horrible, bigoted society, you know? And it's frustrating. It's beyond frustrating. It's infuriating at points because Kate claims that Pride's listening, but they aren't. They've made it very clear that they don't want to listen. It's in one ear and out the other. That's how it was.
So we spent quite a while talking about Pride Cymru, and I think what I'd like to do is to pick up from that very practical example you gave there about asking police to make that one step of, you know, taking off the uniform for that day in that place. That is a practice. Whether they want to do that, whether it's achievable, is a separate question. But that's a really practical example of something that an ally can do. Yeah, somebody that wants to be an ally. So I think you provided a really good example, and that really does speak to this question there. As you know, what do the panel feel makes a good ally? Not in terms of the specifics, but in terms of the general attitudes and behaviours. What makes a good ally, and what would you give? You know, what would you want them to do to tackle that ignorance and fight for inclusion? So, can I ask Selena? We haven't heard from you for a little while.
Okay,
Selena.
So,
what do you look for in terms of basic behaviours from an ally?
So first of all, I just want to say that ally is not a noun; it's a verb. It's not something you call yourself. It's something that is evident in your actions. So we never get to call ourselves allies of any sort. Other people can call us allies based upon what we do. So let me think. What do I look for in an ally? Someone who listens, someone who asks questions without being defensive to actually learn about the situation. We want someone who then takes that learning and puts it into action, because we quite often find that lots of people learn around us, but then they hold that information to themselves, or they'll have discussions with other people. But when it comes down to it, they're not willing to put themselves on the line for us. So that's what we would like to do. That's what we would like to see, people realizing that someone like me and Shash, who have multiple intersections, if you like, of like life challenges, we do a lot of work every day just educating people and trying to get out there and doing stuff, and a lot of this is unpaid. We do an awful lot of unpaid work, and we would like allies to be able to take some of that work off us so that we can actually spend time living life. That would be really nice. We'd really like that. And yeah, and I think that in terms of pride, I'll only be able to be proud of our movement when it's accessible and when everyone can join in.
That's really good, really practical. Stephen, when someone says that they want to be an ally to you, what is it that you would want from them? And your microphone's on mute.
Yeah, no, it's back. From an ally is just encompassing care and compassion and understanding, trying to have the insight and understanding as to where we are being shortchanged, realizing that whatever we trying to achieve will be an uphill battle, and having someone there fighting with us and alongside us, not against us. That's what I would look for in an ally.
That's really brilliant. Alistair?
I resonate with what Selena said, that being an ally it's a verb, it's a doing word. It's you can only be an ally if you are seen to be practically doing something to help. And those practical things of standing up for LGBT people when they witness homophobia, transphobia, or any of those tiny microaggressions that you get all day, every day, in challenging those things so that we don't have to. Things like when you're in spaces that are where trans people perhaps don't feel safe, an ally going to the bathroom with you, just to be on your side in case you get challenged, or those sort of practical things. Somebody standing in and saying, hang on a second, her pronouns are she, not he, or and actually challenging people for you. Those practical things are what I look for in an ally. It's not about taking the voice away from trans people or from queer people or Black people or any of those demographics. It's about supporting them so that their voices are heard.
That's really good. Selena, you've got your hand up.
And I just want to add to what Alistair said about, like sticking up for us and fighting for us. Please do it when we're not around. Don't just do it when we're in the room and can see it. And, sometimes it's harder if you do it in front of us because everyone's looking to us for a response. And it's like, I've only just gotten over the last episode. But that's not to say don't do it in front of us. We want you to do it in front of us, but don't make a big scene out of it. That'd be great. But please do it when we're not there. That's the most important thing, because that's when people don't check themselves, when we're not here. you know, people are less likely to say a racist joke in front of me than they are in front of someone who is white. And so you're more likely to see it happen if you're white. So can you check that for us? That would be really great. Same with transphobia and everything else, please.
That's really fantastic, Shash.
Another view, and I get that question a lot, like, what can we do as an ally? You know, and one of the things I say is like, sign up to groups that like tell you like what. Don't just ask us, tell us what skills you can provide, so we can direct you to a place. So like our group in particular provides a particular thing of trying to delegate like emotional labor that trans people can't do to cis people, so they can do it for us. So like complaining about things that they've had transphobia from institutions, because for us trans people we want to continue with our lives, but cis people, they don't face that transphobia. But at the end of the day, we can't. If we sat down and genuinely sat and wrote a complaint for every single instance of transphobia I would not be able to do anything. And that's partially like allies can do that. They can complain, write to your institutions that have committed any acts of transphobia, complain about staff, raise it up within. Do not give transphobia or racism or anything a pass because, oh, well, they didn't mean it. You know, zero tolerance is what I'm asking for, because at this point, everyone should know better, you know? Unless you're a child or incredibly sheltered, there is no reason you should be racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, etc. Like, there are educational resources you can be signposted to. You can educate yourself. You can read and learn for yourself. And then do not allow any kind of, oh, well, you know, they only said it for this bit. What you don't realize is, although they may have said it to you maybe once, they have said it to 100 other people when you're not there, you know? And they've affected and caused harm to people that you supposedly care about. And more than ever, support marginalized people financially. I can't stress this enough. The economic impact of people who are repeatedly marginalized is shown in studies upon study upon study. It is very apparent that our society, through history, has made it difficult for people of color, for LGBTQ people to struggle financially. We earn less. We are less likely to be educated. We are, and all of these things can be fixed with money, because money can pay for those things. And it is the amount of people I've seen been discriminated from housing because they're LGBTQ, you know, discriminated from jobs, like paid less because they're LGBT. Allies have privilege, and one of the biggest privileges allies have is financial privilege. They have essentially more money, more capital, so redistribute. And I can't stress it enough.
That's excellent. The next question I've got here, it's quite an interesting question. I'm not entirely sure what the person asking the question is looking for. So they're asking, what is a legal definition of non-binary? I think what this person is asking is, what would it mean to a non-binary person if they had the same kind of rights to legal recognition that other people have? Is that some, you know, and how, you know, what would that look like, and what would that bring to you? Is that, I think maybe that's what the person's trying to get at there. Selena, what would it mean?
I'm going to be honest that as an autistic person, that's a bit abstract, that question for me. So I need perhaps more specifics. If someone else is able to start it, I could perhaps join in. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Please.
Yeah, that's okay. So I think, because there isn't, as you pointed out, Kate, there isn't a legal definition currently for non-binary people. The definition, I'd say, that kind of, if we had a legal understanding that non-binary people exist and should be afforded the same rights as people who fall under, who are binary, I guess, it would provide a sense of self, I guess, like it would provide something to hold, like something tangible for non-binary people to hold in a society where they're constantly questioned about their existence. For example, if you tell someone you're non, like, for us, we have the privilege of like saying, oh, from our binary people, we have the privilege of saying, oh yeah, I'm a man or I'm a woman, and it's like, well, it's an immediate understanding of, well, we know what that kind of means. We know that legally you're protected this, that, or the other. But for non-binary people, there's an immediate thing of, okay, but what does that mean? What does that actually like? And it's frustrating in the sense of they're questioned about their existence constantly, and having that kind of sense of self question constantly is demoralizing. It is dehumanizing. It is. It's an othering that it shouldn't exist in modern society. It creates an underclass of people because, for example, like if you try to access like healthcare or any kind of service, and your gender isn't like you tell them you're non-binary, it can become a barrier to access their service. For example, let's say sexual health screenings. That's something tangible for us, I guess. If you're non-binary, a lot of places, they might ask like, okay, but they don't know what to do with that. And they might even tell you and say, well, do you mean man or woman? And it's an issue, a legal definition or something that understands non-binary would actually push the systems we have currently to accommodate and change to recognize non-binary people. It gives a certain power to non-binary people that we binary people have. We have legal backing to say like, oh yeah, actually, if you look at the law here, man, woman are equal, therefore you can't do this to me. But non-binary people, they can't do that, can they? They can't go to a service and say, oh, it's just based on their word. And then they're just, even though there's so many non-binary people who exist here, and it's just, and that's, again, slightly harking back to the ally thing, that is something you can push for in every, like, there is so much we can do for non-binary people in our society. We've got to keep moving forward with it.
Alistair, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Shasha said just there, because for me, yeah, we can, if we get non-binary people recognized as being able to be a legal status, a legal, for want of a better word, gender or non-gender, our systems have to change. Our systems are all gendered. It doesn't matter what public services you're accessing, every service is gendered, and our systems are built on gender. And that has to change. It has to change within the NHS. It has to change within any of the public services that we access in our daily lives. Otherwise, legality of being non-binary becomes meaningless. You know, that if the systems don't change and adapt to accommodate it, then it doesn't mean anything.
Thank you. I think we're coming to the end of our time now, so it's a traditional last question. So because we're quite short of time, can I ask everyone to sum everything up in one sentence? So I'll try and count and hold you to that. But the question is, it's that old question about if you could go back in time and tell your younger self one thing, what would it be? Does anyone want to start?
Don't be scared. It will be fine.
Fantastic. Alistair.
As somebody who's, I'm 54. I didn't start transitioning until I was 47. And my advice to myself would be to trust yourself and be yourself, because it took me a large part of my life to be myself. So, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Kate.
I would probably tell myself not to be afraid, not to listen to people who try and steer you down a different path, because I'm somebody who transitioned back in the 90s, then detransitioned, then retransitioned. You know, because that's also there's lots of sort of attitudes towards people who detransition, and they forget about those who retransition again because of societal. Sorry, I'm waffling on a bit, but I would say I would tell myself not to be afraid and just go down the path you believe in. Don't let others' judgment of you stop you from going where you feel is right.
Excellent. Selena.
What would I say to my younger self? I'd honestly say to remember to take time out for yourself, because it's a big fight and you have to look after yourself.
Shash.
I'd probably tell my younger self two things. Run, that's one, and then give myself an existential crisis earlier, so I run quicker. Because I rather have more of an understanding of my sense of self when I was younger, which would make possibly, just accelerate things a bit, yeah, because I don't know, maybe it's a shared experience, but I had to have that kind of crisis to kind of realize I was trans, and I think having that younger before possibly puberty would have been nice. Yeah.
See a few nods there.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fantastic. You've all been absolutely amazing.
What about you, Kate?
What about me?
Stephen.
Oh, what would I say to my younger self? I'd probably say, put your hand in your pockets, because when you've got money in your pockets and other people who don't have the privileges and the power that you have something in your pocket that can make a difference to those around you. So that's what I would say. And actually, that's what I would like to say to everybody who's watched this. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's taken part. And I've got a challenge to all the allies watching this. I would like you to actually take what I've just said completely literally. I'd like you to all put your hands in your pocket, find a cause that you've heard that's resonated with you today, and make a difference to people's lives. Thank you. You've all been absolutely wonderful.